Springs. More at firstcitizens.com. Forever First, member FDIC. In the forecast, sunny today with highs in the mid-50s. It's 40 degrees right now in Charlotte.
This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. On the local news roundup, COVID hospitalizations rise to record numbers with infections at their highest rate ever. COVID rules for schools have morphed into something resembling the tax code as CMS struggles to find enough teachers to cover classes. A 3-judge panel okays voting maps despite political gerrymandering. An appeal is on the way. Cmpd releases 2021 crime statistics. Some are good, some are bad, but overall crime is down. And we may see our first snowfall of the year this weekend. We get into all of that and more with our panel of reporters. They include WFAE's education reporter, Ann Doss Helms. Good morning to you. Welcome back.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Hunter Sines is with us. He's with WCNC TV, where he is a reporter anchored there. Good morning, Hunter.
Good morning, Mike.
Nick Oxner is WBTV's chief investigative reporter and executive producer of Investigative Reports and author of The Vote Collectors, along with Michael Graff. It's the story of the 9th Congressional District scandal, a book that Ann Doss Helms highly endorses. Is that right, Ann?
I just finished it and it's excellent.
Thank you for the introduction and the endorsement.
You're welcome. And it's becoming clear that Nick should look into how Eric Spanberg has time for this program, considering his considerable duties as managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. Welcome back to you as well. Good morning.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Let's begin with something that happened just yesterday nationally, but has impacted Charlotte as well, because the city of Charlotte released a memo late yesterday following the Supreme Court's blocking of vaccination and testing requirements for organizations of 100 or more employees. As a result of that Supreme Court decision, Hunter, the city no longer intends to implement a testing requirement on unvaccinated workers. Why?
So basically, they're wanting to fall in line with exactly what SCOTUS dropped down, the decision that they made yesterday. Currently, they were going towards either a vaccination requirement or a weekly testing requirement, similar to what the county has done. They had not made moves in that direction yet in this new year, but now this decision basically says you can no longer do it. They, of course, want to fall in line with that. However, I will say any new hires from October 1st of last year on still need to be vaccinated with the COVID vaccine. That's according to a spokesperson.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, because it seems to me if you're going to make some people, those hired after October 1st, 2021, get these tests if they're unvaccinated, but you're going to make earlier hires not go through that regimen, doesn't that open you up to charges of discrimination?
Yeah, I'm no lawyer, of course, so I'm not sure if I can completely answer that question, but it is kind of a question that I had to seek clarification on, because it just does not seem correct that you're dropping the requirement for some, but then anybody who wants to work here for the city of Charlotte now all of a sudden still needs to be vaccinated. It doesn't make sense with this decision.
I'm not sure who to address this question to, but at several points during our ongoing, never-ending conversations about COVID over the last 2 years, we know that at one point, Charlotte Fire and Charlotte Police were among the people least likely to be vaccinated among city employees, and they were against any mandate to be so vaccinated. These are all many of these people are frontline workers who interface with the public. I'm just curious if anybody has brought up whether it's morally right to allow these people to interface with the public if they are not vaccinated, and what this new decision by the city means. And nobody can answer that. No, okay, fine.
It's a really good question, Mike. It's a really good one.
Well, thank you very much. I ask really good questions. Where are the really good answers? That's the question. I know that you reached out to, Hunter, you reached out to the county to see what their reaction to the Supreme Court decision was yesterday. Have you gotten a response?
No, my inbox is still waiting for that response, but they do have that mandate, as we know, and there were consequences when people were not going to follow it. So it will be interesting to see if they backtrack or if they press on with it.
So the number of COVID-19 cases, specifically cases involving the Omicron variant, are rising so rapidly that those numbers are apparently becoming less important. Dr. Anthony Fauci says we will all likely contract this virus. So we should now focus not on the numbers of cases, but the numbers of hospitalizations. And when you do that, at least I didn't feel much better because hospitalizations have reached record highs. What are those numbers this morning? Who knows?
So there were more than like 4,000 hospitalizations. That was as of yesterday. I'm not sure on the data as of this morning, but
that was statewide, right, Hunter? I think
Yeah, that was statewide.
Yeah.
Statewide. I believe here in the county, it was close to like 570 people were in the hospital, and that was a record as well. So hospitalizations, remember, they do lag the uptick in cases usually, and then they stay that way even after we get over our peak.
And obviously the reason is for the hospitalizations, even though this is considered milder, is because it spreads so much faster to so many more people. So you have a lower percentage of people with COVID that are going to the hospital, but you have so many more cases that it still threatens to overload the system.
And to Eric's point, we're seeing some reports like out of New York State, for instance, where the governor there said that, some 40% of people hospitalized with COVID are actually hospitalized for something else and have COVID. And so now we're seeing, Jake Tapper asking great questions on CNN about this, for instance. But it still shows just how quickly this version of the virus is spreading and it's popping up a lot more.
And according to Dr. Raynard Washington, who happens to be Mecklenburg County's new public health director as of the first of the year, because Gibby Harris retired at the end of last year, he said hospitals are, quote, strained but stable, in part because fewer patients require intensive care.
With this current surge, we're not seeing as much admission or much need for some of those more higher acuity care, which is good for the hospital's capacity because, again, patients who are requiring medical ventilation or are requiring intensive care require a lot more staff capacity to be able to manage their care in the hospital.
So because even though this virus, this new variant is more contagious, it is not necessarily leading to many life or death struggles that we've seen in previous iterations of this virus. But officials are still pointing out that the most serious infections, the life and death situations, are among those who are unvaccinated. Is that moving anybody to maybe change their mind about getting vaccinated?
Increasingly, you
No.
can't all see our heads shaking back and forth, right? No.
You TV guys have to learn that.
And there was an interesting item this morning in the Axios national newsletter that said, look, are we basically done with vaccinating people? If the vaccine mandate is gone, thanks to the Supreme Court, we're at 65% of the population fully vaccinated, 75% that's had at least one dose. Are we ever going to reach 80 or 90%? It looks like probably not.
And to your point, Mike, I think it's 80% of those in the hospital in North Carolina due to COVID are unvaccinated. So it continues to be predominantly the serious cases are among those who have not been vaccinated.
But apparently this new Omicron variant is leading more people to try to get tested, and testing sites are popping up almost as quickly as people are getting the infection and as quickly as it's spreading. But Hunter, you reported this week that some of those sites are not to be trusted. Explain that.
Yeah, so I actually had a couple of people kind of message me asking, hey, it's been 7 days and I haven't gotten my results back and I don't know, I can't get a hold of anybody. And there were red flags, like the papers that they were filling out were asking for social security card, for payment information, all those sorts of things that are kind of typical red flags that you should really never give out. So we talked to the Better Business Bureau, who said just that, that when you're in line waiting for this, if it's not one of your Atrium, your Novant, your Star Meds, one of the more notable brick and mortar testing facilities per se, you should be researching that name.
Tom Bartholomew is the CEO and the president of the local Better Business Bureau. Here's what he says.
The pop-ups aren't from around here. Seen some of them from Washington State, some of them from Texas. If it's under a tent and you don't know the name while you're waiting in line, Google the name. BBB the name.
So this woman that you spoke to who was asked to give her social security number, which was a red flag for her, if it's a legitimate site from a hospital system, for instance, like Atrium or Novant or MedStar or some other hospital or even medical practice, and you're not a current patient, wouldn't they be asking you for certain information? I mean, how do you know what's legitimate information to ask for and what is not?
Yeah, you should be asked. Of course, you could ask for your basic information and your insurance card. Those are really the only two big things that Tom mentioned are kind of normal requests from anybody, even if you are a new patient. Because remember, a lot of these tests should be covered to some extent by insurance, regardless. And a lot of times, like I was tested a couple of days ago, per se, and I was not a patient with whoever was doing this. And I filled out my information, and you didn't even have to give insurance information because it was a free COVID-19 test. So they're being funded, of course, however, they're being funded by the feds, by the state to do these tests. They have those partnerships already. So all that you should be asked at bare minimum is for an insurance card and your basic information.
So if they're asking you for social security numbers and other things like that, you know they're bogus, and they're simply trying to harvest information that they may use against you later on. But Tom Bartholomew from the Better Business Bureau told you that each of these testing sites have to register with the state, but it is the federal government who's supposed to oversee them, and it's unclear as to whether or not they're actually doing that. Are these illegitimate sites actually registering with the state, or are they just setting up a tent and letting people come in?
Yeah, so they're supposed to be. Of course, there's an ongoing list that the FDA has. Of course, it's ever changing because these are popping up around town just about every day. So it's hard to know how many are registering and when. I will say I have seen some reporting out of Houston, my hometown, where there have been these scammers that are putting these pop-up tents, and turns out the feds don't really have a good hand on it. As you can imagine, there are so many across the country to try to keep up with. So it's kind of that evolving game that you just can't win, it seems.
The rules on masking changed again this week, not the mandates, but the type of mask that we should all feel secure in wearing. The cloth masks evidently we're now being told, are not effective against the Omicron variant. And they're telling us that we all should wear KN or N95 masks. And if we want to put a cloth mask on top of that, have at it. But the other masks are what we should be wearing. Why? What's the difference between this variant and the other variants, aside from the fact that it's more contagious? Do we know?
Well, just that it's more contagious, it spreads more easily. And so because of that, you need a higher grade of protection, according to the people who recommend these stronger masks. So either the disposable surgical masks, an N95 or KN95. And the goal here is to try to both protect you, which you're not getting protected by a cloth mask. What you're doing by wearing cloth mask, as we all know, is really protecting others from you. But you're going to get some additional protection with the surgical or N95 mask yourself.
And Hunter, you reported on something that I'd not heard about this week: oral COVID treatment pills. These are therapeutics, as I understand it. They won't prevent you from getting the virus, but they will help you if you do get it in treating it. They're available at StarMed's Tuckasegee location for free, but only for high-risk patients. Why isn't the existence of these pills better known? And I've got 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think it's just because they're limited right now. This is very new, and they're wanting them to go kind of like when the vaccines were new. They're wanting to go to those most in need patients, which are people who are at very high risk to either die from this or become severely ill. So they're prioritizing it.
Well, there's still more, believe it or not, there's still more to talk about when it comes to COVID, particularly when it comes to schools, because that too is an ever-moving, ever-changing target. And fortunately for us, we have Ann Doss-Helms, our education reporter, at our disposal to answer those questions, and we'll ask them coming up in just a moment on Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Tyndall Subaru Gastonia, featuring the new 2022 Outback with performance technology and design updates throughout. Details at tyndallsubaru.com and on Facebook at Tyndall Subaru. And from Duke Energy, investing in solar and other renewables to help reduce carbon emissions. More at duke-energy.com/brighter future. Monday on this program, we're going to repeat yesterday's broadcast because it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we're going to be talking about how the Rosenwald schools of the early 20th century literally changed the education paradigm for Black children, thanks to a philanthropist who partnered up with Booker T. Washington. And there are lots of those schools in North Carolina, more than any other state in the South, and many of them are in Charlotte. We'll talk about where they are, what they are, and the effort to historically preserve them. Monday on this program at 9.
If being more active is a goal for this year, WFAE's Charlotte Walks can keep you moving. Commit to run, walk, cycle, or swim during our virtual step challenge now through February 6th. Registration and information at WFAE.org.
It's Charlotte Talks of the local news roundup on listener funded, 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're here with Nick Oxner from WBTV, Hunter Sines from WCNC-TV, Eric Spanberg from the Business Journal. And although she's been very quiet, that ends now. And Helms is with us. She's our education reporter at WFAE News. And we're going to talk about schools and COVID, the intersection thereof. What we know about all of this and how we treat COVID, how we're supposed to alter our lives to live with it is a moving target. The rules keep changing, and the state has revised its rules for schools 3 times in 2 weeks. You say, Ann, that the section of the part of quarantine and isolation now reads like the tax code. So be our H&R Block here this morning and explain what the rules are now.
Yeah, so there are literally all these different if this, then that. So, and the overall goal is to not have as many staff and students going into quarantine because the numbers are showing that relatively small numbers of them go on to actually test positive. So if you've been vaccinated and have no symptoms, you don't have to quarantine. If you are exposed when both are consistently wearing masks, and I think that's true even in a mask optional district, but you don't have symptoms, you can stay in school unless you develop symptoms. If you've had unmasked exposure in a mask mandatory district, say you had lunch with your friend and your friend tests positive, you can still stay in school under the test to stay policy, which is, you test negative. And if you have symptoms, there are various stipulations, but basically instead of 7 to 10 days, it's now 5 days after you feel better and don't have a fever. And when you come back, you have to wear a mask. And that I think is true even in the mask optional district. So you could have students or staff in a mask optional district who are mandated to wear a mask for a certain number of days after having it.
Are medical people or scientists making these decisions, or is this some apparatchik?
Well, I think they're trying to follow Centers for Disease Control and Prevention
Okay.
guidelines, and it has not been super clear. I mean, I can't weigh in personally on the science, but the communication of it has been dreadful. All of these districts
Okay.
were holding mask votes on Monday and Tuesday, and apparently, literally, if you went and clicked on the Strong Schools Toolkit, which is the long list of rules, there was a red note at the top on the cover page that said, updated January 10th, which was Monday night. And then it doesn't tell you what they changed. So you had to kind of like read through this fine print to find a change related to how long ago you've had COVID to be exempted.
So COVID is a new pathogen, and that is partly why we are constantly learning new things about it and why the rules are changing. But these changes make it even more difficult to convince people who are on the fence about this that they should follow these rules, particularly those people who believe fervently that this is all a hoax. And in some districts, information that could help parents and teachers make a decision has suddenly become unavailable. And that's the case in Union County. They are no longer posting data on cases or quarantines. Why?
Well, they said that these changes in rules made it very difficult to track quarantines. And they said, well, you can just get this information from the county health department. which isn't exactly true. This was a subject of much debate at their school board meeting this week because a lot of parents showed up and said, are you kidding us? You know, right now when this is so important, we can't look up our child's school. And so at the county health department, you can find out how many school age kids in Union County tested positive or whatever, but there are no breakdowns by school and there are no quarantine numbers. So this whole thing that people like us would be doing, which is sort of truth squatting and trying to say, if you had comparable data, you could say a lot more about what's really working and what's not. And Union County, I thought, had a great dashboard and they just pulled it down.
And Union County, is that, oh, well, let me ask you that. Is that because of politics? Because there are people on the school board who don't want to tell you that. They want to keep these schools open and unmasked as long as they can.
I think tracking this ever-changing quarantine scene is a huge demand for educators or whoever does it in every district. But yeah, it kind of smacks of politics.
So Union County is the largest school district in the state that has allowed students and staff to come to school unmasked. There has never been a mask mandate in Union County schools. What has been the upshot of that?
Well, they've had fairly high numbers, but again, it's one of those glass half empty or half full. They're in every district that I've seen numbers for, the quarantine numbers are much higher than the numbers of cases. So I think that's why, there are people on both extremes that nothing is going to sway them. But for those of us who are looking at it, it's hard to tell because there is definitely evidence that mask mandates increase the chances that your kids will not get sick, that it's good in some ways. But most kids in mask mandatory or mask optional districts don't get sick. Most schools in mask optional districts don't have clusters. And of course, now with Omicron, the chances that even if your child gets it, or even if an adult gets it, there is a lesser chance that you'll have a really. So some people are saying it's just a cold. I don't think that's, you can look at the hospitalization and death numbers and say that it's more than a cold.
In Lincoln County, one school board member there has voiced his frustration with these ever-changing rules. Mark Mullen has taken credit for what you are about to hear. And we want to warn you that what you're about to hear in the next 15 seconds will be colorful.
So where's any science or basis of this that makes any damn sense whatsoever? I mean, they keep pulling this crap out of their ass every week. They come up with something new, and this is unacceptable for us to try to run a school system.
So he has proudly claimed credit for making that statement, and we heard some applause there in the middle of that. How many people in school systems around the area feel exactly the same way as he does? And is that message getting through to the people who are making these rules and changing these rules?
I suspect they know there's a lot of frustration. And I did talk with Mr. Mullen afterward, and he said, yeah, that's not usually how I express myself at school board meetings. But he was talking about, he had said earlier, and I think he's pretty firmly in the camp of not wanting to mandate masks, but he said, literally, we could declare ourselves mask mandatory, sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and not enforce it. And then we would be able to keep kids out of quarantine because we could say, well, it was just an unmasked exposure. So, and he pointed out that you can have 2 high school seniors who went to get vaccinated together on the same day. And if one of them is 18 and the other is 17, one of them could be required to get a booster to get certain exemptions and the other might not. It has become extremely complex. And we talked earlier about the mask thing. That's raising a lot of questions because a lot of districts require cloth face coverings. So there are a lot of N95s available through the state for adults, but for kids, they don't make N95 masks. Apparently, if you order one online, it's probably counterfeit. So then the question becomes probably, and I asked Claire Donnelly, our healthcare reporter, to check this out and help me figure it out. She said, the 3-ply surgical masks, and there are children's KN95s, but these cute little cloth masks that kids are wearing with all the little, cartoon characters that make them appealing probably are not terribly effective against Omicron.
The numbers of this virus have been rising exponentially day by day throughout the country and also here in North Carolina. And at last week's State Board of Education meeting, North Carolina Health Director Elizabeth Tilson brought attention to a study of school spread of the virus in Massachusetts schools. She said it showed what she called a 10-fold increase in the secondary attack rate in those schools that were not there. I think I may have typed this incorrectly. 10-fold increase in the secondary attack rate in those schools where there was not masking. In other words, not having a mask is really dangerous. It's essentially what she's saying there, right?
Well, it's what it sounded like, but if you read the slide that she was projecting, the difference was 11.7% for the mask optional districts and 1.7% for the mask mandatory districts, which again is that half empty, half full. That's still the vast majority of mask optional. We're not seeing that secondary spread. So it really is just how you parse the data these days.
And masking, of course, remains highly political. At a recent Union County Board meeting, we heard both sides of the argument over masks from parents. Melissa Falanowitz favors masking, and she asked Union County to adopt a mask mandate.
Right now, more UCPS students are out of school with COVID than at any other time this school year or last. This doesn't include quarantine, just active cases. And the same is true for faculty and staff. Masks can help mitigate this surge. Are they perfect? No, but neither are seatbelts, bike helmets, or smoke detectors.
But another parent, Brittany Bolden, thanked the board for standing fast on making masks optional.
I want to take a moment and thank you again for being a voice of reason during what is probably the largest peer pressure campaign in human history. I know it hasn't been easy, but doing the right thing rarely is. The truth is, cloth and surgical masks don't work for a respiratory virus. They never did. Fauci and the government knew the whole time, and they lied. Now, almost 2 years later, they admit it after so much damage has been done, with us divided.
Unfortunately, except for her last claim that we are divided, everything else that she just said is completely untrue. We are divided truly and incorrectly informed because of the Fox News misinformation campaign and other purveyors of dismiss and misinformation like Donald Trump. It was also stressed that Dr. Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, made a mistake by advising people not to wear masks. That was at the very beginning of the pandemic, a time when health officials were not aware, as Dr. Fauci explained, that 40 to 45% of people are asymptomatic. And nor were they aware at the time that a substantial portion of people who get infected from people who have no symptoms. That discovery led him to say that he had something that he's never retreated from, and that is, it is overwhelmingly important for everyone to wear a mask. So let's put that lie to rest, shall we? Meanwhile, in Gaston County, the board has made mask wearing there optional, despite what their health director says is the breathtaking surge in COVID-19 cases. And talk about that.
Well, and again, it's just that same dynamic that you hear. And the three members who were saying, look, we got to listen to this guy. You know, these numbers are really high. Every number that they presented was high. And they also looked at some district data that said we had mandatory masks in November. We had a fair number of cases and quarantines. We got rid of that mandate. And in December, there was a significant increase in both quarantines and cases. Guys, let's put some masks on at least until we get through this. So they were quite vocal, and the four members who wanted to keep it the way it is just kind of raised their hands and passed it. So the health director was saying, you know, and I was paying a lot of attention because, as some of you know, I live in Gaston County. Lots of folks here are getting it and going to the hospital, and that's not unique to Gaston County, although they did say that Gaston County's rate of vaccination for school-age kids was even lower than the state average, which is still, you know, there's still a relatively small number of school-age kids who are vaccinated.
I don't have the audio of the health director in Gaston County, Steve Eaton, saying what he said, but I do have the quote in your story on our online, on your online story on our website. And he says, I was trying to come up with a word to describe what the situation in Gaston County is. And he says, I think the word is probably breathtaking. I don't think I've ever seen anybody say that about anything before. So that's a pretty.
Yeah, he was saying
scary
this is
thought.
not just higher than, you know, X point or Y point. This is higher than we've ever seen. And again, as we discussed earlier in the show, case numbers are not the only measure. That's, you know, people are sort of pulling back from that, but all the other measures were up too.
Finally, with this rising infection rate and staff shortages from resignations and retirements that began to take place at the end of the year and prior to the winter break, teacher absences and other staff absences are really taking a toll at CMS and probably other districts around the country. CMS is facing, as I'm told, 1,000 teacher absences a day on average, after recent test results showed the extreme damage done by a year of remote learning. We're facing the prospect of going back to some form of that if things get out of hand. What has CMS said about that, and what is the probability of that happening?
Well, and to be clear, the probability that CMS as a whole will go back to remote learning is 0 unless the state law changes. What would happen is it would be possible to say, we've got 10 schools where the shortages are just so bad that we can't productively operate. And part of what, I've been talking to individuals who are in there and saying, remote is not good, but what kids are getting right now is not good either. If you are going in and you've got a sub who doesn't know anything about the subject, or you've got teachers who are exhausted because if they can't find a sub, they go to the remaining staff and say, Mr. Spanberg's class is empty, so I need you to take your planning period and go be there for third period. So everybody's stretched thin. Worst case, they go into a classroom and say, we got nobody for you. 1/3 of you go across the hall, 1/3 of you go upstairs, et cetera, et cetera. So they could say, for a certain number of schools, we are going to take you remote for a week or whatever. And we're going to focus our remaining resources on staffing the schools where we think we can keep things functioning in person.
And this is affecting teachers, it's affecting staff, it's affecting cafeteria workers, bus drivers, custodial staff, et cetera. How much of this is strictly due to the COVID virus, and how much of it is due to the great resignation that is going on around the country as people reevaluate their career paths?
I don't know the percentages, but it's clearly both. I mean, there is a long-term huge challenge in terms of recruitment and retention, and there is a short-term impact of lots of people either getting Omicron or being exposed to it.
So last week, a 3-judge panel heard testimony in a redistricting trial involving maps drawn following the 2020 census that impact both congressional and legislative districts in North Carolina. The plaintiffs charged that, like previous maps drawn by our Republican-controlled legislature, these were gerrymandered in ways that disenfranchise and weaken the power of Black and minority voters and make it very difficult for Democrats to win. This week, that 3-judge panel, 2 Republicans and a Democrat, decided unanimously that the maps could stand. Why?
Well, one of the things that they said, I'm sorry, one of the things that one of the things that the judges found was, or determined, is that only in cases of extreme gerrymandering does the court need to intervene. In other words, that the policy of putting these maps together is in the hands of the legislature. So they have the authority to do exactly what they have done. And so this should go forward. And I see Nick nodding his head, and I bet he's going to tell us about some of the instant appeals that are already on our way. So I will hand to Nick.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, it's rocketed right out of the second the order went down. You knew it was going to the state Supreme Court. This was before a 3-judge panel, will now be appealed to the state Supreme Court, which is rife with a mess now, with all sides challenging everyone's bias. There are 3.
Everyone's recused, right, Nick?
Yeah, there are 3 state Supreme Court justices that are accused of having some form of a conflict of interest or another, all in an effort to get them to recuse. The interesting thing, though, on the 3-judge panel is that it was unanimous. 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat all reached the same conclusion.
And I want to talk when we come back about how the fact that one of the Democrat on that 3-judge panel joined the 2 Republicans and what impact that may have on a Supreme Court appeal, state Supreme Court appeal, because the Supreme Court at the state level is a 4-3 Democratic majority. Will they look at that Democratic vote joining the Republicans as a seal of approval that they should stick with? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about these calls for recusal on the part of 3 judges on the High Court when we come back. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and the Charlotte Symphony. Christopher Warren Green conducts Mahler's Symphony No. 9 tonight and tomorrow night at Belk Theater. Mahler's final completed work explores themes of life and death, Tickets and safety information at charlottesymphony.org. The roundup of the week's news will continue in just a moment or two, or actually 20 minutes or so, with a look at around the nation on 1A at 10 o'clock. They'll be looking at Omicron, which continues obviously to spread through the U.S. this winter. Hospitalizations are up due to COVID. They've doubled in more than a dozen states. The president announced a plan to require healthcare insurers to reimburse Americans for at-home COVID-19 tests. And inflation is rising, but so are wages. Maybe yours are. Those stories and more coming up in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock on 1A, and we will continue with our local news roundup in just about 30 seconds. Stay with us.
It's your world. We help you explore it.
Thousands of protesters have been out on the streets and storming government buildings in cities all across Kazakhstan.
It's your community. We help you understand it.
Many cities in the Carolinas had their second or third warmest Decembers since 1878.
WFAE's Morning Edition is an essential way to start your day and stay connected to your world. Weekday mornings from 5 to 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
It's the local news roundup on Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins here with Hunter Sines from channel, WCNC TV. Nick Oxner's here from WBTV, Eric Spanberg from the Charlotte Business Journal, and Ann Doss Helms from WFAE News. Getting back to this redistricting court decision, the unanimous decision by a 3-judge panel that the maps as drawn by our Republican legislature can stand. In a 260-page ruling, the judges said this court neither condones the enacted maps nor their anticipated potential results. Quote, despite our disdain for having to deal with issues that potentially lead to results incompatible with democratic principles and subject our state to ridicule, this course must remind itself that these maps are the result of a democratic process, end quote. But are they? I mean, they come from a legislature whose makeup is the result of previous political gerrymandering, and it was revealed during the trial that Republicans lied about just how open the map drawing process really was, making use of secret maps that have since been destroyed, so the court and the defense cannot look at them. Why was this unanimous? Why did the Democratic judge side with her Republican colleagues, Nick?
Well, because broadly speaking, their rationale is map making is inherently political. And what we've seen is a political process play out. Mike, I'll remind you that the current legislature was elected on maps partially redrawn by a federal court that corrected what that court found was unconstitutional gerrymandering. And so despite after those redrawn districts, you still have a Republican majority legislature, although without any supermajorities in either chamber. This process, but for a senior House Republican who used secret maps and lied about it, that would be House Rules Chairman Destin Hall. This process was done more transparently than almost any other map drawing has been in modern history, right? With all and the reason that those secret maps were such a scandal is all the map drawing was supposed to be done in a room that was live streamed, and you're basically supposed to show your work as you draw the maps. Rules Chairman Representative Destin Hall stepped out in the hallway, consulted some concept maps. You can't see my air quotes on the air. Some concept maps, and then stepped back in, and no one knows what those quote concept maps were or looked like. But at the end of the day, the 3-judge panel found that didn't matter. These secret maps didn't matter because what the result was a political process that didn't take into account any factors that had been deemed to be unconstitutional. Now we'll see. The big question is, will that hold up at the state Supreme Court?
And also, Nick, it is interesting that where I started, or where we started, this idea of defining extreme gerrymandering. Because, you know, the court, in some ways, the 3 judges kind of threw up their hands and said, well, this is the legislature's job. We know it's going to be partisan. We really don't like it. But unless it's extreme, and again, what's extreme, then this can stand.
So this will be appealed. It will go to a Supreme Court that is majority Democrat. Lawyers for the Republican legislators want the Associate Justice Anita Earls to recuse herself because of her previous ties to groups involved with the plaintiffs. They previously demanded Associate Justice Sam Ervin IV step away because he's the only sitting judge running for re-election. And attorneys for those challenging the maps repeated their call for Associate Justice Phil Berger Jr. to recuse himself because he is the son of Senate Leader Phil Berger, who's a named defendant and whose district is among those being challenged. How likely is any of that to happen?
Not at all. But let's unpack that a second, Mike. So you just have Justice Phil Berger, the son, obviously, of Senator Phil Berger, who leads the Senate. Then you have Justice Anita Earls, a Democrat, whose largest campaign donor was a group run by Eric Holder, former Attorney General Eric Holder, whose mission is to, draw better maps, or as Republicans would say, maps more favorable to Democrats. But that is also a group that is funding, at least in part, these challenges to these lawsuits that are going to be before her. And so Republicans have said it is a massive conflict of interest. And then the conflict of interest on Justice Ervin is just that he's up for re-election this year. He's the only one up for re-election this year. And so far, he's issued orders that push back the date of the election. I think there are two of those that we just talked about are some maybe serious, suggestions of a conflict of interest, and the others may be grasping at straws a bit.
So CMPD released Charlotte's crime numbers this week for 2021 in front of City Council. Violent crime dropped 7% last year. Overall crime down 5%, but rapes climbed 19%. Vehicle thefts were up 5%. Vehicle break-ins were up 4%, but overall robberies declined by 22% over the previous year. Homicides were also down 18%. And Police Chief Johnny Jennings expects last year's homicide numbers to decline further as some of those homicides are ruled justified. But he is concerned about the numbers of children carrying firearms.
It's scary to me that, like I mentioned earlier, that a young 13, 14, 15-year-old could have access and make a few phone calls and have access to a firearm.
So to what did the chief attribute the good news about declining crime numbers?
One of the things he cited was this new group that has been focused on seizing, confiscating guns. They had a 33% increase in gun seizures in 2021 to close to 3,000. The chief is also citing, better training, new programs that are aimed at suppressing or reducing violence. And they did make some progress, clearly, Mike, but as you go through those numbers, remember, you mentioned violent crime down by 7%. Well, it was up 16% in 2020. So it was hard for it to go up again. And with the homicides, 98 in 2021, that's still higher than what you've seen in recent years, significantly higher than what you've seen in recent years in Charlotte. So it's only but for the 118, which was a near record in 2020, that went down. So you have to look at these with a little bit of context.
We are witnessing this concerning rise in the number of guns found on CMS campuses, and the Crime Stoppers has raised the reward from $250 to $500 for people stepping forward with information that leads to the arrest of somebody who brings a gun on campus. And so far, nobody has taken advantage of that reward. $500 if you're a high school student or a grade school student or a junior high, that's a lot of money. So
or journalist.
Oh, yeah. Anybody on this panel. So how do you explain that nobody has come forward?
Well, I would think that a lot of students are not, that one would hope that what they are doing is what they've been doing, which is going to a teacher or a school resource officer. Now, I don't know whether they forward that then to Crime Stoppers, and bear in mind that sometimes snitching is considered problematic, especially for older students. So that is CMS, as we've mentioned before, is rolling out an app that will let students report anonymously. They're currently training their staff on how to use that, and they're going to train students soon. And Ernest Winston actually at the last school board meeting said, we're aware from other districts that have done this, we're going to get some prank and bogus reports from that. Please don't do that. Guns are really serious. Please don't report your buddy because you think it's funny.
So this week, the City Council took up in earnest the Unified Development Ordinance, which codifies the great aspirations found in the 2040 Comprehensive Charlotte Plan, which will change the zoning rules. And this will lay in law in one place all these new changes. But that didn't turn out to be the big story out of the City Council meeting. The big story turned out to be the kerfuffle over, at least to me it was, the kerfuffle over the changing of assignment of the head of the Economic Development Committee from Tariq Bakari, a Republican, to Democrat Malcolm Graham. We had the mayor on this week, and when he was presented with the change, Tariq Bakari said that the mayor acted out of vindictiveness because he had challenged her on how federal recovery dollars were allocated for the mayor's racial equity initiative. That came out at the end of last year. So when the mayor was on the program on Wednesday, I asked her for her reaction to that charge.
My response is that I know who I am. I know how I work. And I believe that when I make this kind of decision, it's a thoughtful one. And it's something that I've talked with a number of people about. And I think it's the right decision.
Bakari told the Business Journal that you told him that you couldn't, quote, have someone in a leadership position who refused to show proper respect. Is that true? And if so, to what are you referring?
Oh, yeah, that is definitely true.
Okay.
I would never say that that's not true, but the conversation was much broader than that as well. But I also want you to note that Councilmember Bakari is still a committee chair and one of our most influential.
So is this just politics as usual, or is this an evidence of the ever deepening divide?
I really think this is probably pretty much politics as usual. It was the oddity here was that Councilman Bakari ever became economic development chair, not because he's not qualified, but because he's a Republican on a 9-2 council that's led by Democrats. So I think you take that and then you combine it with him repeatedly questioning the ethics of the mayor, whether it's vindictive or not. It seems, pretty logical or reasonable or expected anyway that there would be a change after that kind of friction between the mayor and one of her committee chairs.
Meanwhile, Nick, you folks at WBTV are working like the January 6th Congressional Committee. You just uncovered text messages that raise questions about whether or not two of our top leaders can work together. We kind of knew about this last February. This is all about the 10th city, about the kerfuffle between Dina Diorio, the county manager, and the city manager. But you've uncovered the text messages from Dina. What do they reveal?
My colleague David Hodges did they finally produced the text message he asked for a year ago. So among the things, the deep dislike or low opinion of city leadership, including city manager Marcus Jones. Dina Diorio, the county manager, wrote, quote, "The city is useless!" exclamation point. And in another response to something that city manager Marcus Jones wanted county manager Dina Diorio to do, she wrote, "This is bull bleep." Not what you want the heads of the two largest governmental bodies in town to be thinking about each other.
Quiet down, children, quiet down. We're on the radio. Okay, we're going to move on to the biggest story of our lifetimes now. Grab the kids, butter up the sled runners, rush to the store, buy up all the milk and bread because snow is on the way. And Brad Panovich, chief meteorologist at WCNC-TV, has joined us now, not from the Salt Lake City Airport, from right here in Charlotte. What is the story here? We're going to get Winter Storm Izzy. Is that right?
Well, first of all, we don't name winter storms. That's a marketing term the Weather Channel uses. So that it's funny. Everyone uses the names, but the government does not use those. It's not any entity. It's just a Weather Channel thing. So we don't actually name storms. I'll put that out there first. We are going to get a winter storm, Mike. But here's the thing. It's primarily going to be ice. I think everyone who thinks they're going to see a winter wonderland and be sledding and making snowmen probably need to be ready to be scraping and maybe cutting limbs down and maybe without power. That's a much bigger threat with this storm.
Are we talking, how much ice accumulation are we looking at potentially?
Well, that dreaded number we look at is 1/4 inch ice. And once you get to 0.25 or above, you start having enough weight on power lines and tree branches that they start to fail. So in the Charlotte area and into just to the south, so Union County, York, Lancaster, we're probably looking at 1/4 to 1/2 inch of ice, which could cause some significant issues. Now, there will be a little bit of snow and sleet. And remember, sleet counts as snowfall, even if it doesn't look as nice But when those combine, that could be 1 to 2 inches of that. And if you throw some freezing rain on top of that, it's kind of like throwing hot glue on a whole bunch of snow, and it glues it all together and makes almost like a glacial type ice on the road. So I think that's going to be our two biggest issues, going to be travel and then the power outages because of the ice threat. But it's not going to look pretty, but it's going to be a mess.
Now, initially, we kept being told that we're going to get several inches of snow accumulation, more to the west of us in the mountains than in Charlotte, but nonetheless, we were supposed to get some. But then all you meteorologists standing in front of the weather maps were pointing to this cold air at mid-levels of the atmosphere coming in from the northwest or the northeast, and then damper air coming in off the ocean from the southeast. And that generally sets us up for ice, not snow. And that's exactly what you're saying is going to happen.
Yeah, the temperature at the surface is going to be plenty cold enough. The problem is you go up around 5, 6, 7,000 feet, the temperature could be close to 40 degrees up there. So is that snow, which probably is going to be snow when it's falling from the cloud, will melt back to liquid and then fall into that cold layer at the surface. It's either going to do two things, depending on the thickness of that cold layer. It's going to refreeze into a pellet of sleet, or it's going to stay liquid, but then become ice after it reaches the surface and refreezes as freezing rain. So that's that dreaded setup. Oftentimes these forecasts are tough because you're not looking at just the temperature at the ground. That's actually the easy part. I need to know the temperature at 3,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet. And the difference between rain and ice is 0.1 degrees Fahrenheit. 32.0 is snow or ice, 32.1 is rain. That's a very difficult forecast, especially several days out.
So how convinced are you that we should be buying up all the milk and bread, and that we should prepare to be iced in for Sunday through Monday?
I would be ready for poor travel. I think that's the most confident thing I can tell you, that driving around on Sunday and Monday morning especially is not going to be great. We have a lot of cold air at the surface. So that's the one thing we're not lacking here, which means anything that falls, regardless if it's your snow, your sleet, your freezing rain, is going to be accumulating or sticking to surfaces Sunday into Sunday night. And that's going to make for really treacherous road travel. The biggest question I have is how much ice is that? Because the difference between sleet and freezing rain, again, is a very small margin. And why sleet is not great for the roads, we probably want to root for that because that's much better for our power outages.
When should this begin? When should this end?
It should start late Saturday night, and I'm thinking after midnight, like probably 2 a.m. going into Sunday morning. The worst of it will be the first half of Sunday, starts to taper off Sunday night, and actually could end with some snow showers, and then should be all gone by the time we wake up Monday morning.
WCNC Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich, who wins the award for Best Bookshelves on Television or Radio in the background. Also with us, Hunter Sines from WCNC, Nick Oxner from WBTV, Eric Spanberg from the Business Journal, and Ann Doss-Helms, our education reporter here at WFAE News. Thank you all. Button down the hatches, buy up the milk and bread, save a slice for me.
Charlotte Talks with Mike Collins is a production of 90.7 WFAE.